Resources, inspiring interviews, business practices, and practical advice to take your art career to the next level. Join Sergio Gomez in today's Artist Next Level and get ready to take control of your career.
Here in today's episode, I'm having a conversation with Marine Costello. She's Communications Officer for Parker Harris and also an Instagrammer sharing the history of art with the world. Well, hi, Marine. How are you today? Thank you for joining us. I know you've been quite busy this summer. You are Communications Officer for Parker Harris and also a very active Instagrammer, which you're going to tell us all about. You have a background in art history and you love that. And you've been very good at sharing that, your passion, with the world through social media. So today we're going to talk about social media marketing in the now. That's kind of like the conversation that we're going to have. I found that you and we have a lot of things in common. We love art, of course. We love working with artists, helping artists. We also love art history and social media and marketing. So, there's a lot of common ground that I think is going to give us a really nice ground for conversation. So before we kind of chat into the specific topic of social media marketing in the now. Tell us a little bit about where you are now and, how's your day been like so far?
Okay, well, hi, Sergio and friends. So my name is Marine. I am, as you said, the Communications Officer for Parker Harris. So this morning I've been handling social media, press, and marketing for a bunch of art competitions. We also organize art exhibitions and we mentor artists, which has been amazing because, I really get to accompany creatives on what they're doing on social media.
Very good. Awesome. And how long have you been doing that?
I've been doing it for the better part of a year after graduating from my master's in art history. So before that, I used to live in Paris, and I've since then moved to the UK. It's been an interesting time to move internationally for sure. And before that, I created, as you mentioned, Art Featured in History of Art Daily, where I share my passion for art with roughly 150,000 followers. And I'm really passionate about making art accessible.
Very cool. Now, is it a specific part in the history of art that you are really excited about? I know it's long and extensive, but what's like one specific maybe period in time that you really like to dig into?
Yeah, well, I got a master's in 19th century art, particularly in France. And I happen to be really interested in animals in art and how that became its own theme. Mm-hmm. It used to not be seen as worthy of art, if you will, unlike historic paintings or portraits. Mm-hmm. And in the 19th century, they started making a lot of sculptures, which you see around today, and making these really impressive lions. And so that's what I studied in particular, and I really enjoyed it.
That is very interesting because, animals have been, around forever. And at least since we've been around too. And, our relationship to animals is very interesting. And it has evolved and changed over the centuries.
Yeah, well, what's interesting and, what I looked for through my research is that this interest in animals in sort of monumental sculpture, it coincided with zoos opening in Europe. Okay. So all of a sudden, so before that, kings had lions and cheetahs in their, like Louis XIV, the king of France, but it wasn't widespread. So with the revolutions across Europe, the access to these tigers and lions and elephants all of a sudden became not mainstream, but more accessible. And that's why they started sculpting them and becoming interested in them. And so it coincides with all this, backstory. And coincidentally, the editions of bronze sculptures started to develop. So people would be able to buy these sculptures on a much more accessible, price point. And so that's why they became widely popular.
Wow, that's interesting. Well, you see, I didn't even know we were going to be talking about animals in the podcast, but that is so cool. And now let's transition into social media, right? And how the world has changed and continue to change. Speaking about animals, even my dog has an Instagram page that my daughter manages. So let's talk a little bit about, social media marketing in the now, particularly pandemic time. It's something that I think as the world closed down, I think we all ran into the one thing that we all had access to right away, which was our phones, social media, to interact, to connect. People began to have more interactions, more conversations, doing Zoom meetings and social media, live videos and live interviews, which I did a bunch of them too when I was in lockdown. So all these things have really come to become now more important, I think, in the artist's life than ever before. While social media has always been important, I think now many artists who maybe were in the fence before are like, wow, I really need to put more attention into this thing that's called social media. So tell me a little bit about, in your perspective, how, now social media has changed in the way we use it as artists, or we could use it as a tool.
No, absolutely. Well, in the first few weeks of lockdown, the time users spent on Facebook, Instagram, and co, it soared by 40 to 50%.
Wow.
Is considerable. But as you said, we couldn't physically meet, and as of now, it's still not the same as before. So experiencing art, going to a museum is not the same. So we have to find different ways to make it accessible. So I think artists have really realized, oh, if I'm not on social media yet, I need to get on it now. And if I am, I need to up my game. And it's really important for artists, I think, to take this time and familiarize themselves with it. But I also know it can be overwhelming if you're new to it. Right. We get to mentor a lot of artists, and they tell us, well, listen, I want to be in the studio. I don't want to be tweeting away.
Yeah.
Or they're very shy, for a lot of visual artists, putting themselves out there and also putting their work into words is a very challenging thing. So I'm more than happy to, share a few pointers and tips.
Yeah, that would be great. I think for our friends watching right now, I think some tips, a couple of beginner tips and a couple of pro tips, so that way, because we have a range of viewers in the show. So for somebody who is kind of like you said, like you mentioned, maybe has been shying away from social media, what are a couple like you think are really important tips that they can have today?
Right. Well, if they're just starting out, I'd say, I think a lot of people are shy about it because they see it as a different world. But what's happening on Instagram isn't separate from your practice. Right. A lot of people draw inspiration from these social media platforms, for the better or the worse. Right. But it's called social media for a reason. So I'd say my number one tip is to just be social and be yourself. You obviously want to project a professional image and show your work in the best light, but you can also be yourself. You don't have to be like the next person. You don't have to all of a sudden become this fake Instagram influencer.
Personality, exactly.
Exactly. I'd say also, if you're starting out, you can play around with different platforms and get comfortable with them. I'd rather have an artist say, listen, I can reasonably only do Instagram and Facebook and get that, rather than have also a Twitter and a Pinterest and what have you, and then not keep those updated regularly.
Right.
Because if your page isn't updated, it's probably that you're really busy, but it's actually sending people the message that you've got nothing to say.
Right.
So I'd rather you have, you go, okay, I'm going to try out Instagram, and then figure it out from there rather than overwhelm yourself
Right,
and
right.
be on all these platforms.
Yeah, and it's kind of like the idea of focus, right? Like it's better to be really good at one platform that, kind of mediocre at all of them, right? Like you said. So kind of get to know. And I always say that there's a difference between being on a platform and actually mastering it, right? So if you focus on one, for example, or two that are your top, then you can really master the tools and the techniques because you're putting more attention to it. Pretty much whatever you put your time into, it grows. Whatever you don't put time into, it dies away.
Very true.
So let's talk a little bit about now. How about two pro tips for those of our friends who are on it, who are good at it, but maybe on focusing on Instagram, since that's one of the platforms that you use a lot for your art history as well.
Yes, absolutely. Well, for Instagram, I'd say a really important thing for me that a lot of artists, even if they've been on the platform a lot, don't do is post it only if it's relevant to your art. Mm-hmm. So, I see a lot of people that will post personal content or political content or things that have nothing to do with their art. And, you really want to keep in mind your strategic goals. Is it to grow an audience of collectors? Is it to meet gallerists? Is it to network with other artists? So keeping those goals in mind, you really want to share with the world what you want them to see. And that's your art. So I'd say create a separate personal account where you can post all your political opinions,
right.
you can post all the pictures of your dogs. Because I love pictures of dogs, don't get me wrong.
Right.
But, you want to keep the two separate if it doesn't feed into your art, right?
Absolutely.
If your art is political, then feel free to share your political opinions. But if you're sharing beautiful, peaceful landscapes, then I'm not sure it's the place to post about the latest election.
Right. I totally agree on that. And that's why my dog has his own page.
Create it. What we'll take away from today is to create a page for your dog.
Right. The only time you might see my dog is if it shows up while I'm working in the studio and walks through, and I take a picture. And I think that people kind of like that because it kind of gives you a real scenario of what's happening in your life. You're not faking it, or yes. But it's within the context of your artist life and your creative pursuit, as you mentioned. Yeah.
No, absolutely. I think pictures in your studio or with a piece of your work are great. Especially from a sort of mathematical point of view, because if you show your face in a picture, it will get twice the amount of engagement. And you've probably noticed this because it creates this connection with your audience. So, it doesn't mean to not be yourself, but you want to keep your post relevant to what you want to be sharing with the world and what you want them to take away.
Absolutely. No, I think that's a great tip, a pro tip, and maybe a pro tip also on Instagram stories. I think a lot of our friends are using or beginning to use Instagram stories. I always say, you gotta have a story always going, even if you don't have time, you can always find an early post and just share it to your story. So at least there's always a story so that your bubble continues to pop up in your followers, right? So what is maybe one of your favorite features on Instagram stories that you enjoy the most?
Well, I really like it when artists use Instagram stories to give me deeper insights into their work. Great. So as we were just saying, there's things that you want to keep away from your feed. But, if the dog shows up in the studio, then by all means, post a little 10-second Instagram story.
Right.
You can also, if you're a bit shy and you don't want to post a full-length IGTV video, minutes, you can post little talking head moments where, you grab your phone and you go, hey friends, I've just finished this. The paint isn't dry yet. This is what it's about. It can allow you to get candid with your audience and create that connection. And then if you're a bit shy, in 24 hours, it'll disappear from your feeds. So
exactly. I love that. And especially because you don't have to overthink it. Sometimes artists, we overthink too much, the post. And it makes sense if you're doing, a post for your feed where it's going to stay there on a more permanent basis. But if it's something that's going to be gone in 24 hours, you don't have to wait for the perfect lighting or the perfect everything, the perfect hair or makeup or whatnot. It's more an immediacy that gives the follower, as you say, a direct kind of a window into the artist's life. And I think for many non-artists or people who are not really in the art world, right, they are really interested on how is art made and how artists work. And I think that gives us as an artist an opportunity to kind of like bring people into our studio, into our creative process, and give them an insight. And from that experience, sometimes they may become collectors, so they may want to have what you are creating because of that sense of closeness that you are creating.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's important. I mean, we've talked about this. I think it's important to make art accessible, and also to sort of demystify this idea of the collector. Everyone can buy art. I don't think a lot of people would show up and describe themselves as a major art collector, but they still want to support your art if they're interested in it. So I do think, just as you said, it's important to bring people along on the journey with you and show them your process, and also to show them what the work is about. So to share the story, I think people are really interested in knowing about artists and how they work and why they created the thing they created. And it helps people relate to the piece.
Absolutely. I love that. I think those are really good tips for our friends. And one last question about social media is, over all the platforms, which one is your favorite? I think I have an assumption, but which one is your favorite to use and why?
Yeah, I would say my favorite is Instagram because it's such a highly visual platform. On other platforms, you can create a post without an image. On Instagram, it's impossible. The app won't let you. So I think for me, for someone who works in the visual art industry and loves seeing artists and their work, then it's an amazing platform. You have to keep in mind the advantages and the downfalls of every platform. Right. Take a look at what the demographics are, how the posts are. You can go a lot more in depth in Instagram than, for instance, on Twitter. But Twitter also has an immediacy that you don't necessarily have on Instagram. So it's really about, for artists, finding the platforms that work the best for them and for the type of work they want to share with the world.
Absolutely. Yeah. And some of the emerging platforms like TikTok, some of the artists who joined in early on and had that kind of that immediate fun way of presenting their art and so forth, they're doing really good. Right. And kind of like they found a platform that was like great for them, because of the way it was formatted as a quick, 15, 30-second video. And then the next one.
Oh, absolutely. TikTok is an interesting one because, we all looked at it going, well, it's only 14-year-olds, which is fine, but not necessarily your demographic if you're selling large scale pieces of work. And then lockdown happened and people of all generations
jumped in
on TikTok. So your mother and your grandmother are on it now, and they might buy a piece of work. I think with these platforms, it's also about keeping a connection with your audience and not necessarily selling to them all the time.
Yeah. And the evolution of the platforms, right? When Facebook started, it was for kids or for college students. Now that's the grandma and grandpa's preferred platform, right? And now my kids are in TikTok and they're like, oh, that's old stuff that I'm not in it, So how things change and evolve over time is so interesting. And thank you again, people like you who continue to sharing your expertise and your knowledge, to help us all artists to continue working in a smart way, the best way we can. So, Marine, where can our friends find you, particularly your pages related to the history of art on Instagram? If you can share a little bit where we can find you, that'd be awesome.
Okay. Well, if you're interested in art history, you can find me at History of Art Daily across all platforms. You can also find me at Art Featured for contemporary art. And you can follow Parker Harris. So it's Parker Harris Co. On Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter for tips for artists, for art opportunities, and great exhibitions in the UK and internationally.
Awesome. Well, Marine, you've been so good. Thank you so much for being here with us, for joining your expertise, your knowledge. We'll be making sure that we follow you on all social medias as well, and our friends as well. And if you enjoyed today's episode, do us a favor and share it with all your friends. Don't keep these tips only for you. Share them also with all your friends so that they can benefit from that. And let's make sure that you follow Marine as well in all your social medias. Thank you, Marine, for being here with us. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Bye, everybody.
Check out our website at www.theartistnextlevel.com, where you will find our podcast library, learn about our upcoming webinars, find resources relevant to your career, and much more. Thanks for listening to today's podcast, and we'll see you at the next level.